Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to continue with the same chapter, which is Cultural and Ideological Turns, Chapter 8 from this book, Introducing Translation Studies by Jeremy Monday. And our topic today is Post-Colonial Translation Theory. So far, we have discussed the introduction, the key concepts, the key text in translation as rewriting, and translation and gender. In this lecture, we are going to uh, discuss this post-colonial translation theory, which is very interesting theory. Although in our national context, we are lagging far behind as far the research is concerned. Anyways, uh, just like the previous lecture, because there are new names, new concepts and ideas, so I start with the background information, which is very important uh, to discuss the subsequent ideas in this chapter. uh, this scholar, Gayatri Spivak, is professor at Columbia University, and she is well known for her essay "Can the Subaltern Speak?" She is a well-established post-colonial writer, and this article, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" is a founding text for post-colonialism, and she often focuses on the texts of peoples who are typically marginalized by dominant Western culture, including immigrants, working class, women, and other subaltern population. Subaltern means those who cannot speak. Another writers whose writing shall be discussed in this lecture is Niranjana, and a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of Culture and Society, India. Is a cultural theorist, translator, and author. The terminologies is translatees or translationees, which means awkwardness or ungrammaticality of translation, such as due to over literal translation of idioms or syntax. Actually, we can also define this term translatees or translationees as the distortion of the original culture into the target text through translation. Vekana, in the context of Niranjana's work, has come here, is a Kannada jana 12th century saying or prose poem. They represent the radical views on religion, society, and they reject bonds of caste, creed, and gender differences. Kannada, a language spoken mainly in the state of Karnataka, now Karnataka in India, and Sevyat is a member of a branch of Hinduism devoted to the worship of Shiva, but rejecting the notion of his incarnation. So you can say they are one sect in Hinduism. If you see these the Vakana kind of poems or prose or saying or prose poems, they are very much you know similar to what we have in Punjabi literature by the Sufi poets or the Sufi saints. Shiva or Mahadev means the great god, is one of the principal gods of Hinduism. The term new criticism is a formalist movement in literary theory that emphasized close reading, particularly of poetry, to discover how a work of literature functioned as a self-contained, self-referential aesthetic object. We can also give that this is the study of the literature in general and the poetry in particular, from the structural point of view, that the structural study of the poem tells us that how this work, literary work, functions, because it has self-contained elements and aesthetic object which is, which is telling itself what it has in it. Let's start cultural turn, the post-colonial translation theory. What do we mean, or what does post-colonialism mean, or post-colonial means? Is an academic discipline nowadays, is a complete academic interdisciplinary discipline featuring methods of intellectual discourse that analyze, explain, and respond to the cultural legacies of colonialism and imperialism. So, in the past, colonialism, and in the present kind of colonialism, which is imperialism, the human consequences of controlling a country and establishing settlers for the economic exploitation. What happened during the colonization, and what negative impact colonization left on the human society, and also in the present and the modern day, the effect from the powerful on the powerless or less powerful people. Post-colonialism studies of the history of the former colonies, of course, the studies of the powerful European empires, resistance to the colonialist powers, studies of the effect of the imbalance of power relations between colonized and colonizer. And as I said, this is not just related to the past previous colonizers. The study also encompasses what is happening now as for this phenomenon is concerned. Post-colonial colonialism attracted many translation researchers because they found that there is a link between post-colonialism and translation studies, and that link is the power relations. Post-colonialism in general, we can say the powerful nations and the powerless nations, the colonizers and the colonized. But here, the powerful languages on one side and the power weak languages on the other side. Though, what kind of power relations these languages had in the history and they have now, and when a translation is done from the weaker language to the stronger language, what happens? So interdisciplinarity of post-colonialism and translation studies, started with the essays by Leifwer and Simon, which appear in collections of post-colonial writings on translation. Simon herself makes extensive reference to the post-colonialist Spivak that I have just provided you basic information about this post-colonial writer Spivak. So this is the situation, the intersection of translation studies and post-colonial theory. The 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 common point which combine the post-colonialism in general and post-colonial translation theory, in between that, is this: the both study the power relationship between the powerful and those who have less power, and the powerful languages and the weaker languages, and so on, and what happens in the process of translating from weaker language to the power language, or vice versa, from powerful languages to the weaker languages. uh, we start with the views of Spivak, as I introduced her in the beginning of this lecture. Her article, The Politics of Translation, which was published in 1993, and she combined in this article the feminist, post-colonial, and post-structuralist approaches. And she discussed ideological consequences of the translation of third world weaker languages literature into English, the strong language, and the distortion, as I said earlier. So her focus in this article was the ideological consequences, the cultural distortion that take place during the translation of third world literature into English, weaker language to the stronger languages. She also highlights tension between different approaches. As I said, the different approaches mean the feminist, post-colonial, and the post-structuralist. She is against Western feminist. From this context, when she is concluding in her article, She is against Western feminists who expect feminist writing from outside Europe to be translated into the language of power. And hence, she says that because these translations from the weaker languages, from the weaker cultures to the stronger language, which is English, and the stronger culture, which is English, do not actually represent the actual situation of those deprived and suppressed women. Such translation is often expressed in translatees. As I said, the translatees or translationees means that there are a lot of distortion that happen during the process of translation. And this translatees or translationees eliminates the identity of politically less powerful individuals and cultures. So feminists from the hegemonic countries, her suggestion to the feminist European Western feminists, that the feminists from the hegemonic countries should show real solidarity with women in post-colonial context by learning the language in which those women speak and write. If the feminists, European feminists or the Western feminists, they want to understand the real problem faced by the women in these third world countries, they need to learn their languages so that they understand, because the translation is a bigger hurdle, in rather it presents a distorted image to them. uh, in the act of wholesale translation, she's also discussing this wholesale translation into English. There can be a betrayal of the democratic ideal into the law of the strongest, because it's when you are translating too much, the feminist translator, they are translating from the local languages, from the weaker languages, and they want to highlight the issues faced by women of those societies. And when this wholesale translation into English takes place, so what happens is that the democratic ideal is marginalized, is compromised during this translation process. And this happens when all the literature of the third world gets translated sort of with it translatees, so that the literature by a woman, now she is comparing a literature by a woman in Palestine, begins to resemble in the feel of its prose something by a man in Taiwan. So it's because of the translation or because of the power relationship between this strong culture and those weak cultures. Politics of translation is giving prominence to English and the other hegemonic languages of the ex-colonizers, mostly the European languages like French, Spanish, and German. So this is as for the translating is concerned. And she is also talking about the translation studies fails to translate the difference of colonized view, because the translators over assimilate it to make it accessible to the Western readers. When they are translating, their conscious intention or their unconscious intention is to, of course, make things accessible for their readers, for their Western reader. And in between, there's a commercialism, and in between, there are publishers, those who invest money on this translation and also on publishing these works, because they are in the business. So they would like to present them a translation which is very easy, which is very friendly for them, and they are comfortable while they read this translation. So, linking of colonization and translation has played an active role in the colonization process. Spivak has also talked about this, and in disseminating an ideologically motivated image of colonized people, actually distorted the image of the colonized people for the readers of the colonizers. So it is the parallel to the metaphor of translations and of woman, inferior translational copy of colonized whose suppressed identity has been overwritten by the colonizer. I think you can recall Simon's work in this regard as well. So this is the summary of Spivak's views on post-colonial translation theory, and as I said earlier, she is considered the pioneer in this regard. We have another scholar writing on this very important area, and she is Niranjana's views, and we are going to discuss her views here. And she wrote a book citing translation, history, post-structuralism, and the colonial context. And her focus was on the literary translation. And she says that literary translation is one of the discourses, the others being, she has also discussed other discourses, that is education, theology, historiography, and philosophy. So, uh, uh, one of these discourses is literary translation, and she says that which inform the hegemonic tools, which actually tells what hegemonic tools that belong to the ideological structure of the colonial rule. The ideological hegemonic tools, of course, in the case of a literary translation, are the tools used for basically they are language tools used to create that image. You can see the in this picture that she has studied, of course, literary translation, education, and historiography, philosophy, and theology as the ideological structure of the colonial rule. So they are tools to use for the purpose of creating that ideological structure of the colonial rule. Imposition of ideological values through missionaries, of course, through education also, who ran schools for the colonized, and they performed role of linguists. We should also recall the history of the subcontinent in this regard. When the colonized actually they established the missionary schools, and they also became the linguists, Urdu, the local language, especially Urdu and other languages, and they also became the translators and ethnographers and recorded grammars of native languages contribution by them. All these groups participated in the project of collection and codification on which colonial power was based. uh, Focuses on the way translation into English has generally been used by the colonial power to construct a rewritten refer lever idea image of the East. uh, she criticizes translation's role as practice within this power structure, as it shapes and takes shape within the uneven relations of power that operate under colonialism. So of course she is very harsh on that side, and she is criticizing not only the translation, she criticizes translation studies as well, for its Western orientation, and for its main three main failings. So she says that translation studies has failed in three different aspects. Number one, translation studies has not considered the question of power imbalance between different languages. Mind you, her book was published in as we can see in uh, I'm sorry, I have not. I think it was in 1996, perhaps, or maybe 1992. Correct me when we meet, because it's written in the book. So she is telling this in that era. But this now is not true, because a lot of work, a lot of research has been produced after that, and I think this criticism does not stand valid right now. And she is also criticizing the concepts underlying much of the Western translation theory are flawed. So she says that uh, the the definition of culture, the definition of the languages, the definition of other things have been established, ignoring the elements, the difference in the language, or the difference in the cultures of those the countries where those who colonized, in weaker languages. And she also criticizes translation studies for this humanistic enterprise of the translation needs to be questioned, since translation in the colonial context builds a conceptual image of colonial domination into the discourse of Western philosophy. So what she is trying to target is the epistemological foundation of translation studies, which was, of course, established in the writings of the Western scholars. What is she now recommending for recommendations for actions? So post-colonial translator must question every aspect of colonialism and liberal nationalism by avoiding Western metaphysical representations and dismantling the hegemonic West from within. So, her view is that there must be interventionist approach, that the translator should play that role. Deconstructing and identifying the means by which the West represses the non-West and marginalizes its own othersness. In this way, such repression can be countered. Her hope is that she calls for an interventionist approach from the translator. Analyzing translation, she also analyzed the translation of a Vekana poem, as I have told you. She criticizes existing translation as attempting to assimilate Saviat poetry to the discourses of Christianity or of a post-romantic new criticism. The way these things have been translated into English. I think it's better to take some example, maybe in a couple of slides, or in this slide. She resists the containment of colonial discourse by rewriting the name of the poet's god, Linga, representation of light. She criticized means that the words that carry the rich cultural elements, they should not be translated, because they, if they were translated, they are dislocated, and rather they are distorted. Rather, they if you translate them in the god, just god, or the god of light, maybe there are other cultural properties that cannot be transferred to the English language. So she criticizes avoidance of similes that would tone down the native form of metaphorization. So the metaphors that are used in the local culture should be taken as they are, instead of finding the parallel in the target language, or the equivalent or similar experiences or instances in the target culture and the target language. So her, view is that the same metaphorization or same similes should be translated into English in the same way, with the same images, or with the same words. So this is Niranjana's views, and if we want to compare the work of Spivak with the Niranjana, we find that Niranjana, Spivak's focus is on the feminism, and Niranjana's focus on the pure the influence of colonization on creating that ideological structure of the colonizers through these uh, 1 2 3. Yes, sir. Literary translation, education, historiography, philosophy, and theology. Whereas the Spivak just focuses on mostly on translation and some other things. We have also Basnet and Trivedi's book, Postcolonial Translation Theory and Practice, which was edited by these two scholars and published in 1999. And in the introduction of the book, the power relationship being played in the unequal struggle of various local languages against the one master language of our post-colonial world, which is English. So translation is thus seen as the battleground. So it has become a battleground between the powerful, again the imperialists, and those who have been, those who have been marginalized, are the weaker uh, languages, weaker cultures. So post-colonial translation studies take many forms, as they have told us, and with this, the picture completes of the post-colonial translation theory between the Western powers, the colonizers, those who colonized the Eastern parts in 19th and 20th century, and of course ultimately their cultures, and this culture and how the culture of the locals colonized was depicted in the writing, in the English writings, in the writings of the European languages through translations, and what role has been played by the translation in this regard. The Irish context presents a different angle. We know the Ireland is considered one part of Europe, but the Michael Cronin book translating Ireland is very interesting contribution in this regard. Of course, when we talk of the post-colonialism and post-colonial translation theory, we usually talk between the Europeans and the Asians, the colonizers and the colonized. But here, the Michael Cronin says that there is internal colonialism within Europe itself. In his book translating Ireland, and translation, has played a political battle between the Irish and the English languages, and he has studied this phenomenon from the historical, political, and cultural angles, starting from 16th century till the modern era. Uh, he is referring to an act for the English order, which was issued in 1537, and the purpose was that every Irish person should speak and learn the English language, and the purpose was subjugation of the Ireland through this language policy and through this, of course, cultural domination. And he, the Cronin, this author, of course, they create a parallel between translation on one side and the physical subjugation of the Irish on the other side, that both were similar and both were, carried out by the colonizers at the same way and the same level. In 17th century, translation into English was promoted by, we are talking about the patronage promoted by the aristocrats, the church, and the large number of new settlers, the English settlers in Ireland. So the patronage that we have discussed um, in Leifer's work, translation as rewriting, here he is referring to the patronage provided by these wealthy people. In 18th and 19th centuries, translation to English by Irish scholars was an attempt to oppose views of Irish history and literature produced by England and to defend their own culture. Historically, what happened, because they started, of course, raising their voice against this colonialism in 18th and 19th century. So what happened, that they also started producing a literature which opposes the views of Irish history and literature produced by England, and they started defending their own culture because it was really, distorted and through the translation as described by Cronin. Uh, so from the his point of view, the conclusion: translation is a political issue still now in the modern post-colonial Ireland, because the translation between other European languages and both Irish and English by Irish writers is financially supported by the Art Council. That means the economic power still rests with the former colonizers. So this is very interesting that we see this, that there is internal colonialism. Usually, when we talk about the post-colonialism or post-colonial translation theories, the common image is that, but the Cronin has contributed in this way and has also discovered and mm, described the internal imperialism, which is maybe still going on. I don't have time to talk about one of the conferences that was held in under the auspices of United Nations about the European languages and how English is now penetrating into these European languages, eating up those languages. We can talk about this topic some other time. So with this, the post-colonial translation, the topic is almost discussed, and we can discuss this topic further when we meet. And as for the next advanced reading assignment is concerned, it is the remaining part of the chapter, starting from the ideologies of the theorists till the end of this chapter. Try to read each and everything, but especially the I shall not be able to discuss the case study during this recorded lecture, but we can discuss the case study when we meet, of course, after that lecture. But try to read each and everything uh, uh, that has been discussed under this in this chapter. Thank you very much. See you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi